going to ask a follow-up question, if I may, Prof, and then I'll move on to Professor Finney. I just thought we might talk a little bit about a very, very well-celebrated structure, and that is the NCCC. And we know, of course, that we have the NCCC at a national level, the PCCC at provincial level, the MCCC at local level, and then we have the district development model also feeding into that at district level, somewhere in between the PCCC and the NCCC. And then, of course, we have the NatJoints, which was established for the World Cup, which I always like to think of as sort of like our technical intelligence hub, which fed into the NCCC. And all of these interventions that you describe were all facilitated through these structures. Now, what I'd like us to talk about a little bit is if you can just kind of briefly explain those structures and how they worked. And I want to ask you, Prof, and I just thought about this, so I didn't actually prepare this question, but I want to ask you, could we replicate something like this at regional level or even at sub-regional level? And why was it helpful to have a structure like this as opposed to just managing everything through your traditional cabinet?
Okay, thank you very much for the question that you asked. Let me start by saying that when COVID hit South Africa in March, the first thing the president demanded was a national plan on how to deal with COVID-19. We had more than 30 scientists across the country putting together a plan within 2 days to say, what exactly should we be doing to deal with this pandemic? So we prepared the plan and we presented it to the president, and the Minister of Health immediately set up a structure that was supposed to be a ministerial advisory committee with regard to this. At the same time, the government has decided to set up a National Coronavirus Command Council. And that council comprised of key departments that would be impacted by COVID-19. And that structure included all of those heads of department or key individuals in those departments responsible for putting together a response, because this was a multi-sectoral response. It was not a health response. I need to say that very clearly for South Africa, because the pandemic was not just a health problem. The pandemic, it continues to be a social and economic problem. So all of those departments, including the police that were supposed to be ensuring that behaviors, human behaviors, company behaviors are actually controlled. So we set up such a system. It then had that council, because it had all those ministers, it also had a civil society, not civil society, but a civil service staff that were really working with the nitty-gritty things, because National Coronavirus Council would take on the policy decision, but the implementation of that would be monitored and followed up and be guided by the National Coronavirus, the joint program that was comprised of civil society people. Now, the civil society, as I indicated, they also organized themselves around the country so that they could. They came up, I think, about 5,000 civil society organizations, put them together to go out to the communities to educate people about COVID-19, to say, what is it that we're supposed to do? It worked out very, very well. At the provincial level, there were similar structures that were replicating what was happening at the national level. At the local level, those structures were also working together. But there was another structure that you may have not mentioned. That is That is the structure that is composed of the provincial premiers and the president. Before we could take on a position nationally to be finalized by cabinet, it had to go first, to the provincial heads. And the provincial heads would then look at it and say, within our provinces, how should we be handling this? Should there be differentiation in terms of how we handle this, or should it be uniform the way in which it should be handled? So it really worked out very nicely. Can it be replicated? I would think that Africa did exceptionally well compared to other regions around the world in terms of working in a very coordinated manner. With President Ramaphosa being the chair of the AU at the time, he convened about 4 bureau meetings regularly, and even other in between meetings with key people that work for CDC or who are responsible for getting COVID vaccines and so forth. It worked out very, very nicely. So I do believe that Africa has shown the world that we can be organized to be able to do what we need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I understand that Dr. Feni is going to need to leave us just now, but if you could just give us just 5 minutes, Dr. Feni, and thank you so much for your time. Yeah. But what I'd like to ask you, thanks. What I'd like to ask you, Dr. Feni, is as countries look to balance the COVID-19 response with economic and social recovery, what role do non-governmental actors stand to play, and how can groups like the AU provide support? And also coming a little bit further down the levels, the role of the AU Health Commission on COVID-19. You are in the Africa Recovery Group. How do you see the role of this commission actually contributing to Africa's economic recovery?
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Mazi. So we have worked as commissioners, and I'm happy to have Prof. Chisano here with us, looking at the economic recovery and social recovery for Africa post-COVID, and even as we battle COVID. And we realized that the AU has a position that will help us to galvanize all member states to be able to help with the recovery, especially when it comes to the manufacturing of vaccines. We've talked about it. We've talked a lot about vaccine inequities over the months, over the years. And we realized that we need to be able to do this as a continent. One of the ways we see African Union's role is to galvanize investments and galvanize resources, both human and financial resources, to be able to do this. And over the years, as we talk about recovery, we are talking about not just the financial aspects, the economic growth and the reserves and the revenues, but we are talking about our human capacity. So technology has been one of the areas that we thought we could come in and support. So we have a digital economy that we talk about, and the fact that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here in Africa, but we can, use all these foundational work that has already been done and work within our own context and be able to come up with solutions that serve our own purposes and needs. And so we are asking through this recovery for governments to work together, to collaborate together, and engage with different partners, both here on the continent and outside, to find solutions that will work, so solutions that are also sustainable. Because many times we see so many projects start and never end. And this is really not helping us. We need to have a sustainable way of working out our solutions. Otherwise, we have ad hoc projects all over the place, and we never seem to see the end of it. So finances are important. I'm not biased because anything that has to do with projects, programs needs finances. But we also have the possibility of managing what we have, working within the limitations of our resources. Yes, we do not have the funds, but we still have the capabilities to work with. So Africa's recovery is not just about what we have or what we don't have, but what we are able to do with the limited funds that we have now. And so which areas do we need to prioritize? Which areas do we think, if we put in a few resources, will help us to galvanize all the attention to solve our problems? And I'm happy with some of the solutions that Prof. Chisano has highlighted. We have to come up with our own workable solutions. And going forward, I hope that the AU will galvanize all of us, all member states, to be able to do this, especially with manufacturing of our own vaccines. We've talked about it and we've reflected on it several times, but I think we still need to do more. And hopefully we will not be at the back of the queue time and time again. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Feni. And actually, it's really great that you picked up on some of the commonalities that actually link all of us, that we can pick as low-hanging fruit to really, for example, like digital technology, etc., and all of the issues that commonly affect us that we can pick as low-hanging fruits, particularly because that was going to be one of the questions that I was going to ask Professor Maha El-Rabat to actually cover. So when she comes back, I'm going to ask her to pick on it and run with it. And I think we need to let you go.
I'll be here as long as I can, and I'll drop off as soon as I have to.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, then can I ask you to, I'm actually going to come back then and ask you that question. There's two aspects to the question I'm going to ask you, and you can think about it in the meantime. So firstly, what do you think are the common, sort of, just coming down a little bit more technical, common issues that we can all begin to work on right now as a continent that affect all of us? Yes, we know that there's diversities of culture, diversities of topography, wealth, etc. But what can we all band behind right now to prioritize socioeconomic recovery? Some of the diseases, pathologies that are common for pretty much most of us, or at least are of concern to most of us, even if we don't have them, that we should actually be looking at. We know that there's a big call to say that we need to recover health services that have fallen out during COVID by through the means of integrated services. So what are the pathologies that we can integrate with the services that have been developed during COVID-19 to ensure that we recover those services? So I'm going to leave that to cook in your head, and then I'm going to come to Prof. Shisana. Prof. Shisana, I'm going to switch a little bit, and we're going to talk about women. And the reason why we're going to talk about women is because, first of all, we are the most on the continent. There's more women than men. And of course, we know that women have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19, socioeconomically, physically, mentally, etc. So what I'd like to ask is, as a key, I want to discuss the critical aspects of investing in women as a key strategy for overall economic recovery. And the thing is, Prof, is that women are actually demanding action now. They're complaining, and Dr. Feni just alluded to this. They're complaining that whilst we have excellent policies specifically for economic recovery for women, and also that we even initiate great projects, these policies are not finding expression on the ground, and projects get started, but they don't sustain. And this leaves the communities in the lurch. It happens at a time when they really have just begun to partner with government and other players, and they're really wanting to carry on. But of course, they wouldn't have the resources to do so. So how should we be effectively linking political will and high-level political policy and academia with sustained ground implementation?
Well, you are quite right that women are very restless when it comes to gender inequality. It is so because if you think about it, in our continent, 70% of women are excluded financially. And we know that we've got a big financing gap, when it comes to women. And it's about 42 billion, between men and women. That gap is just too big, And we know that there is gender parity within Africa. And we know it's going to take us about 140 years for Africa to reach full parity, according to work that has been done by McKinsey and so forth. So it's very important that whatever it is we do, we must actually consider the gender lens. We must look at everything through the gender lens. Even when we look at the magnitude of COVID-19, we must look at it through the gender lens. We heard yesterday that the magnitude of COVID-19 in Africa is severely underestimated. So we generally count only those who come to the health facilities with symptoms and illness. But here I'm going to use the gender lens and look at it in terms of the magnitude of COVID-19. And I'll take South Africa as a country, as an example, because most of the cases are there simply because they are reported. We're doing quite a lot of work to test people and bring them to health facilities and be able to do that. Now, the question is that, do we look at this information through the gender lens? Let me start by saying, if you look at the incidence rates, per 100,000 in South Africa, you'll find that women have got a much higher rate than that of men, particularly those that are in the economically active group of 15 to 59 years. The range may vary from about 700 to 400 at the low end, and at high end, it would be 2,700 to 2,200 for men. So if you do have a pandemic that is affecting women at this high rate, you would think that we're going to be focusing a lot more on women. You are going to see that some of the information that we have shows that we're not doing as well as we should when it comes to women, and therefore women have got the right to stand up and fight for their rights. You look at hospital admissions, you find that they are much higher in females than males in South Africa. We've just published a paper in the South African Medical Journal, which shows that about 55.5% of the hospital admissions are actually in females rather than in males. Now, COVID has had a big impact on women. If you look at some of the work that has been done by SALDRO at University of Cape Town, the researchers have shown that twice as many women as men lost their jobs during the COVID-19 lockdown. Now, the numbers are staggering. We're talking about 2 million women that actually lost jobs compared to 1 million men that lost jobs. And when the schools closed, women were saddled with the responsibility of childcare at much higher rates than men. Men could continue to do their work, very well. And that work, obviously, still, the research it still comes in from the SALDRO, work, the SALDRO staff. Now, the recovery plans, the way I look at it, they're a very serious differential impact on women, with 41% of the women having those benefits. You remember I talked about the unemployment insurance fund, beneficiaries and so forth. 34% of those have been paid to women. So the bulk of that money that you see that I've been talking about went largely to men. By March 2021, the recovery had remained uneven at 8% lower than pre-pandemic levels, while men's employment seems to have fully recovered. Now, these are the things that make women to want to stand up and say, enough is enough. In addition to all of those challenges, they also experience sharp increases in gender-based violence, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic started. If you look across Africa, in East Africa, about 48% increase was seen in terms of gender-based violence, as reported by the police or toll-free lines. About 36% of respondents in Central Africa, they reported an increase in violence in households. And the murder was occurring every 3 to 4 days in North Africa. In South Africa, we saw a 37% increase in weekly average insofar as gender-based violence is concerned compared to the pre-pandemic period. In Liberia, we saw a 50% increase in gender-based violence. All of the statistics were produced by the UN Women, by the Office of the Rights of Children and UNFPA. So I want to come to another area that really governments ought to be paying more attention to across the continent and across the world. But starting with the case of Kenya and on teen pregnancy, and you can say the same thing of all other countries. It's not just Kenya. South Africa had the same problem and many other countries had. The teen pregnancy increased very, very much by about 40% in Kenya. That is 152,000 teenagers became pregnant. Sexual reproductive health services need to be strengthened to prevent teenage girls from becoming pregnant. But also, we need to go to those men who actually impregnated these children. When these young girls are delivering babies, we need to find out who's the father and go and arrest those fathers, because that is statutory rape. For those that were below 16, it is statutory rape. And in many countries, it's not acceptable. So we need to set up our family planning programs so that we can be able to prevent the teenagers from becoming pregnant. But most importantly, we must stop the men from impregnating these young girls. So if we look at what the governments have actually done during the COVID period, and looking at the work that has been reported by WHO, we are finding that the women had major problems in many of these countries. 59% of them said there were no family planning services, or they were reduced compared to before COVID started. About 71% of them, they said, well, uptake of family planning and commodities in the health system was very low. We also found out that there was a large, or close to 50% of countries, in close to 50% of countries, there was a stock out of family planning commodities. And we also had major problems in terms of funding for sexual and reproductive health services. And 94% of countries said that, sexual and reproductive health services were a challenge insofar as collecting data. This is about political leadership. This is about ministers of health, ministers of social development, ministers responsible for sexual and reproductive health, doing the work that they are supposed to do to walk the talk. So here are some practical examples that we've been able to do in South Africa. The president has proclaimed a program of preferential procurement for women, to say women are suffering during the COVID period. They are economically disadvantaged. They are left out. Let's do something. So he came up with a program of 40% preferential procurement, meaning that of the procurement that government does from the fiscus, 40% of that procurement should be directed to women. So what was necessary was to create a program which would prepare women to participate in the economy by accessing that 40% procurement opportunities. The idea was to facilitate access to funding for these women so that they can get money to start up their businesses and grow it. They were to increase the number of jobs that were created by women enterprises. They were to provide practical and hand-holding coaching and mentorship to support women who qualified as women-owned businesses. They were to increase the revenue of the women-owned businesses by ensuring that these women actually gain access to public and private sector opportunities, for business. So it was very exciting to see that there was concrete action that was taken to say during this recovery period, women must actually participate in the economy. The second example that we had in South Africa, which was also launched by the president, it is the program called the Economic Women's Assembly. This particular assembly was aimed at implementing the South Africa's economic recovery strategy by activating and expanding women's participation in manufacturing, in retail and other sectors of the economy. And therefore, their aim was to contribute to GDP growth and rapid job creation. If you bring women into the picture, you are likely to generate more jobs. Now, to expand South Africa's productive base, it's necessary to increase the number of women businesses as well as increase the demand for their products and services in the private sector companies. The other thing that we tried to achieve with this Women Economic Assembly was ensure that the private sector supplies development programs are gender transformative. Thus, they facilitate women's economic empowerment as stated in our national strategic plan that we have that's guiding us in terms of how we deal with gender-based violence. And this was also dealt with globally at the Generation Equality Forum, which it was held in Paris in July, this year. We also with this economic assembly, wanted to adopt a clear plan for each sector, which addresses the capacity of women's own businesses in terms of mobilizing private sector leaders to buy into the plan and implement it, and then mobilize the public sector to create an enabling policy and investment environment. And finally, this Women Economic Assembly, we had to make sure that it establishes a clear monitoring framework to ensure that implementation is reviewed annually and refined for better results. If you don't have a monitoring and evaluation system, you are not going to be able to know whether you are really making an impact insofar as women's economic empowerment is concerned. In conclusion, maybe I should just say that what we need to do is to make sure that we mainstream gender equality and we use the GDP, a analysis of the GDP, but using a gender lens, because we want to advance women's equality in the African economy. And I'm sure it could add about 10% of the GDP or $316 billion by 2025, if I really believe very much on what McKinsey is saying in a very interesting report on Power of Parity report, on advancing women's equality in Africa. It's a very important report that we need to be reading all the time so that we can know, are we getting to that 2025 targets that have been set? What we need is to get politicians, as I indicated, to walk the talk. Although they would budget for economic empowerment of women, few of them are going to implement it because they'll argue that, well, we don't have regulations that allow us to do this or that. South Africa realized the unfair benefit of women on TESS, UIF, as well as the Social Relief Distress Grant, and decided now to include women who have childcare responsibilities in the grants. And the impact of that was that suddenly you saw women benefiting more than men. So we're able to correct that situation in the country. And the introduction of our program on Wekona that I've just talked about on women's economic empowerment is going to allow women to become part of the mainstream economy. And finally, I just want to say that health services need to be restored by ensuring universal health coverage to make sure that it is attained. So everyone in the country should be able to get health care that they need. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Prof. And that actually beautifully segues back to the question that I had for Dr. Feni. Dr. Feni, we have 10 minutes left. And I see that Professor Al-Rabat is trying to join. So if I may give you, say, about 5 minutes to respond. And then if Prof. Maha could not join us again, then I'm going to just go. There is a question here on the group. I'll go to that question. If you can hang around for that, that's fine. If you need to leave, that's also fine. Thank you so much. Let's go back to those questions on our priorities and the things that can bring us together immediately.
Yes, so thank you very much. And I think the gender focus is very good. It's good that it has been highlighted. But there are also certain other aspects of the recovery, specifically for the health sector, that needs to be looked at. We have issues to do with mental health, and increasingly that has become a challenge. And we know for sure that that sector doesn't have enough investment in terms of health, financing, and also health workers. So mental health issues have to be looked at critically. We also know that there's a double burden of disease, so we still have our NCDs that are continuously becoming a burden for our societies. And we know exactly what the COVID did for access to good quality care in terms of routine care and essential services. And so these are areas that we need to really look at and improve the infrastructure around and the resources around this area. We also talk about the area of inadequate health infrastructure, especially with our laboratories. Until COVID, many of us were not aware that we had very, very limited numbers of research facilities and national laboratories to deal with all the different aspects of the COVID response. So this is a major area that we need to continuously look at, invest in. And one thing I remember that we talked about in the recovery is it's about making sure that we have funding for all the different requirements to do with any future pandemics. So yes, we are faced with this now, but what are we doing? What are we putting in place for the future in terms of health security? So this is the time to plan for the future. This is the time to put resources and investments for the future. We can't do it alone. Countries cannot bear this burden alone. And so again, trying to work collaboratively to get these done becomes very important. One of the areas I need to also talk about is our diagnostic capacity. With everything else within our health system, we are importing at very huge cost. We still have huge deficits, but we still need to import all these very expensive diagnostic machines and equipment, and even our medication. Majority of it is still imported. Back to this same issue of trying to find local solutions for our problems. We need to start investing in these areas so that we don't keep on spending valuable foreign exchange on equipment and drugs and medications and things that we can manufacture ourselves and save us some money. Again, many governments have relied on budgeting mechanisms to make up for the shortfall because of COVID. We've seen how very, very, very stressed economies have become because of COVID, because of revenues that have been shifted, reallocated from different sectors to meet the demands of COVID. So again, we have to start looking at where to invest in within the health sector and other sectors, broader sectors, so that we don't get to this point where we are having to take on loans and increase our debt because of these pandemics. Again, the workforce we have talked about, we need to invest in our own workforce. The gap, the workforce within the health sector and outside the health sector demands that we continue to build the capacity of our health workers. We talked about the brain drain. And it's happening, whether we like it or not. Our health workers are still leaving our continent in numbers that are very, very disheartening, but then it's the economics of, better salaries, better way of life for them. And we have to find a way of trying to improve how we take care of our workers, our health workers, so that they are in more conducive conditions that will make them to stay and work. We need them, but we still have to find a way of resourcing them so that they're happy to stay and work. I think I will wrap up with these words. And if Prof. Maya is here, maybe she will say a few words before we go.
Thank you very, very much. Now we've literally got 4 minutes, so I'm going to go to the questions. There are 2 questions here. The first one, or rather it was the last one, but I'll go backwards. Somebody has said, please, I would like to know more about the document on advancing equity in Africa mentioned by the professor from South Africa. I think that was the gender parity report that she's referring to, Prof. Shisana. There's a question from Baptiste Joanne who says, how can we work collectively to address the lost community livelihood as a result of COVID-19 through local initiatives? So, Prof, I'm going to give you that first one, and then Dr. Feni, I will give you that second one. There's one more that's come through. So I think it's 1.5 minutes each now for each question. It's Faith Mbiju, I hope I've pronounced it correctly. Is it possible to give mandatory training on basic coping skills to back up mental health services? And the session, which has been incredible. Thank you very much. Prof, let's start with you. 1 minute.
Okay. No, on the book, it's the report itself, I'll actually put it on the chat. That will be easier for the person to be able to follow. In terms of closing.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. In terms of closing, I really want to say that there is something that we can all do together. We can start just a low-hanging. In terms of closing, I really want to say that there is something that we can all do together. We can start just the low-hanging fruits that we might just want to have. Let's start a national program to develop women within 1 year to grow their businesses. We take women that are already starting their business, they are struggling. We take them, we give them capacity, and we get them to be able to grow that business. If you train a woman, you actually are training a community. So I think that's the first thing we need to do. The second thing I think we need to do is that we must change our laws to make it easier to provide preferential procurement to women until they can claim 50% of public and private sector procurement. We are 50% of the population in any country, or at least slightly more or slightly less, but around 50%. And therefore, we should be benefiting the same way that men are benefiting. We must also use the gender lens to ensure that in all what we do in terms of our economic stimulus, it does not leave women behind. I would like to see women participating in everything that men are participating in. We cannot wait for 140 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And Dr. Feni, we will close out with you 1 minute with your response and closing remarks.
Yes, so I just challenge governments of the AU member states to optimize services and working conditions of the health workforce so that we will decrease the incentive for our health workers to migrate out of Africa, out of our key health service areas. We need them to support us. And so that is my plea. Let's find a way of incentivizing our health workers so that they find it very useful and an enabling environment for them to stay on and work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much to the panelists this afternoon. We're very, very sorry that we could not get Professor Maha El-Rabat in with us, but an hour is just too short, just between the three of us. You know, we really struggled to pack in everything that needed to be packed in, but it was an incredibly rich conversation, and I really would like to thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that those who have been watching have also learned a lot. And I'm sure that the women who are watching are feeling very, very hopeful that, yes, there are things that are being done and that there's more that will be done, that can be done as well, that we can all be involved in. Now, we will have a 30-minute break after this session, and then we have a special session on developing, producing, and delivering oral therapeutics. I'm really excited about this session because I feel like as a continent, this is really something we should be, gunning for. So please do join that session. We should all really be a part of that conversation and really, get those oral therapeutics rolled out for our continent. A very huge thanks to Africa CDC and to the organizers of this conference. And so far, I've had a wonderful time. My head is about to fall off because of the information that's all going in. But a huge thank you, and we'll see you in half an hour's time. Go and enjoy your coffees. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
you.